This is, of course, as you can imagine, the most exciting part of the Borlaug 101, because this is Borlaug 2.0. And what do we mean by Borlaug 2.0? We mean the future. We ask ourselves in this session, what would Norm Borlaug have said today when he was a young researcher and he met a young Swaminathan and a young Ronnie Kaufman and an even younger Monty Jones and even a young me? What would he have said to us? What would he have wanted us to do? So this session is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to invite all of you also to participate in two ways. First of all, I have my Twitter tablet here, so send in your questions, you know, the World Food Prize, or sorry, Food Prize 15 handle. And the second thing is you all found on your seats, in principle, two sheets, a green one and a red one. Do you all have them? Yeah? Okay, so because we're going to vote also, at least we're going to give the green light or the red light to things that we feel are really the priority. And mind you, we're talking about priorities for the future. So I especially want the back. I want the young people, most of all, to come in and help us vote. Vote about the future. What will be the green revolution if we had to start it today? Or put differently, how are we going to tackle the problems that face us today, which are indeed also the problems still that Norm faced, about disease pressure, about water, about just getting up the productivity of the cereal crops. As we just heard in the last session with Pamela and others, it's also about food quality. We also know it's about food safety. It's about the food chain. It's about avoiding waste. We're avoiding, you know, up to 30 or 40% of the food that is being produced because it does not land on the plate of the consumer. So our questions are both wider, but they're also very narrow, very specific, because we know more, for example, about the genetics than we did before. So what we're going to do, we have exactly 1 hour. Each of them, and there you will see they sit here in order of their acquaintance and the length of time they have been working with Norm. I thought it was an appropriate way of doing this. Don't count me. I will tell you about my relationship with Norm in a minute. So here we have MS, with whom it all started with Norm. And then we have Ronnie, who was his PhD student. And then we have Monty, who was in many ways involved. And Monty and Ronnie and I should say, were also involved in getting the rice productivity up, which led in part also to Monty's World Food Prize here. So this is an intimate connection of generations here, all in the spirit of Norm. So MS is going to start because he has a message he wants to tell us. And what a message it is after 90 years, and let's assume you started early, so at least 75 years of thinking about agriculture and food productivity. MS, the turn is yours.
Thank you, Louise. I thought this is the last of the session of this year's Borlaug dialogue, and now Borlaug 101 is coming. Therefore, what is the Borlaug legacy, and how do we not only continue but expand it in the overall umbrella of the Zero Hunger Challenge? I want to first, 4 or 5 slides I have, I want to, not too many, but first thing is a very important one. When Borlaug started his work in the late 50s, 60s, there was an atmosphere of doom and gloom all over the food front. In fact, books like Paul and William Paddock, Famine 1975, Paul and Anne Ehrlich, they all predicted that countries like mine have no option except to starve. But then this great transition which has taken place, particularly the younger generation I want to know, we had before independence in India, a very large famine in Bengal, undivided Bengal, Bangladesh and India, where 3 million women and children and men died out of hunger. From the Bengal famine, now 2 years ago, the government of India in Parliament enacted an act which gives right to food for 75% of the population. It is no longer a patronage, not a charity, but it's a right, human right to food. And there are several features of this particular legislation. One is the woman in the household, the senior most woman, is made the head of the household from the point of view of the food entitlements. thereby recognizing the critical role of women in household food security. Secondly, the food basket has been enlarged, not only wheat and rice as before, or corn and so on, but a whole series of millets, what we call orphan crops, which were not considered important. But today, in the context of climate change and also in the context of nutrition security, many of these crops are coming into prominence, many of the millets and so on. And thirdly, the whole life cycle approach was adopted with particular attention to the first thousand days of a child's life. These are some of the features of the, can you go? So the evolution of the Borlaug legacy, I said in the context of the Zero Hunger Challenge, with what kind of paradigm shifts we require. One is obviously in those days, we were concerned more with food production, food availability, whether wheat or rice or corn in the market. But now we are talking about nutrition security, the paradigm shift from food to nutrition security, which means attention to protein, micronutrients, what's called hidden hunger, protein hunger, and also drinking water and nutrition literacy and primary health care. So nutrition security is a much wider concept. The second paradigm shift we require from the 16 is purely what is called a green revolution approach to what I have called an evergreen revolution approach. In other words, increase in productivity, in perpetuity, without ecological harm, without ecological, mainstream ecology in technology development and dissemination. And thirdly, last one point I want to make, which with Norman Borlaug's very favorite sentence, no time to relax. In fact, I think that was the title of his Nobel Prize. When he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, he gave a talk called No Time to Relax. The food to nutrition security, today it is possible. I have designed a farming system. This particular slide relates to my own recent work. Farming systems for nutrition, providing agricultural remedies for nutritional maladies. In other words, the farming system is designed with nutritional considerations. It depends upon what nutritional considerations you require. Some cases it may be purely micronutrient deficiencies. Sometimes there may be protein hunger. Sometimes there may be calorie inadequacy, undernutrition arising from inadequate purchasing power. Farming systems for nutrition provides an agricultural remedies for nutritional maladies. For a sort of educational tool for the farmers, how to design the farming system, we put in genetic gardens of biofortified plants. For example, many naturally occurring plants, something like the moringa drumstick, is so rich in a wide range of micronutrients. We just heard a report on the sweet potato and orange, yellow flesh, orange flesh. Finally, you train local community itself called community hunger fighters, a woman and man who are well versed with the nutritional problems of that area. I think, will you go on? Oh, they are doing it from here. So my last point, no time to relax, major challenges ahead. These are all well known to you, have been also made in the last few days here by different speakers. Avoiding food losses and food waste, enormous waste. Dimensions were shown, I think, yesterday, how much food is wasted. Climate change, we do not know the full consequences, but they are slowly emerging. More frequent drought, more floods, unpredictable weather conditions, and so on. Synchronized and also shrinking per capita land and water resources. Expanding biotic and abiotic stresses. Adverse cost, risk, and return structure of farming. In other words, the economics of farming, the price volatility, market volatility, and above all, reluctance of youth to take to farming. In addition to that, we have problems of political nature. The Middle East, for example, today is undergoing political instability. Price volatility is a very important point. In my country, we say the farmer's fate is determined by the monsoon and the market. Monsoon determines whether there is water or not. The market determines whether it will be economically or not. Therefore, one of my papers, the future belongs to nations with grains and not guns. This is my conviction. Still, there may be people who believe the guns are more important than the grains. But I think in the coming few years, the last slide is the one. You see, as was mentioned by Ambassador Quinn, I have known Dr. Borlaug for a long time. When I was in Wisconsin, 1953 onwards, one great quality of him, anybody to recognize not only a great agricultural scientist, technologist, but his human compassion. And there I compare him with Mother Teresa, her qualities of compassion. So that coalition of the compassionate. Mother Teresa was once asked, you are doing, Mother, wonderful work, but what you are doing is just a drop in the ocean. A young boy asked her, and she said, what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. In other words, every one of us, if we really want to make a contribution, that missing drop doesn't matter whether it's a large one, whether it's a small one, the contribution. But the coalition of the compassionate, I hope the World Food Prize Foundation under the leadership of Ambassador Quinn will become the hub of a coalition of compassion. Because again, yesterday someone mentioned there's enough food in the market, there's a food in the world, but people don't have the purchasing power. Whatever may be the reason, the number of hungry is very alarming. The data were all given, the hunger index, by International Food Policy Research Institute. So I would say at the moment, my concluding remarks are, no time to relax. These are messages of Dr. Borlaug. We should take forward in the coming year, 101, there's no time to relax. But there's also no time to relax on the scientific front. What worries me is in decreasing support to organizations like universities, CGIAR centers, all public good research institutions. There is no time to relax in supporting them. If we think that we have solved our problem, we will be living in an illusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's, I think we all agree, a wonderful summing up of the new messages that Norm would have put to us. But we're not yet there. Ronnie, looking back at what you learned from Norm and where you're going and where your work has brought you, what are your messages? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think a big one, we've heard from a lot of CEOs and deputy CEOs this week, and I think one of the big messages which Borlaug would agree with is that, you know, academia needs to work more closely with industry. And Louise and I are here, we're from, you know, two of what we'd agree are the great agricultural universities. By the way, I should set the record straight, Wageningen is #1 this year, just so you. Anyway, we have absolutely no resistance to working with industry. In fact, you know, our founder, Ezra Cornell, was an industry person. He was the IT person of his day. He made a fortune. He invented something to string telegraph wire. He made a fortune. Then he saw people were building, you know, telegraphs between two cities, bilateral. So he said, oh, you know, you need a network. So he spent his fortune trying to buy up a network, and he went broke and still didn't have a critical mass. But then he found out some guy down in New Jersey was doing the same thing. So he merged, you know, made a partnership, and they call that partnership the Western Union, just so you know where Cornell's origin came from. It's really deeply steeped in industry. But, you know, partnering with industry these days, now that it's consolidated, can be a problem for our institutions. And I think, you know, this is one of our big challenges for the future, is how to do that. Industry is so consolidated that if the university starts working closely with one of these giant companies, you know, it can be stigmatizing. So this is something that I think we see as a big challenge, but I know one that Dr. Borlaug would want us to address. He first worked, you know, for DuPont, and he was very proud of it, very proud of what he did there. So there's no resistance to that, but how to do it in this new era is a challenge.
Thank you, Ronnie. Monty, you are truly the African Norm Borlaug in some ways because of the work you did with NERICA. Everybody knows NERICA. Is anybody of the students doesn't know NERICA? Does that mean that I see no hands that everybody knows NERICA, African rice? Okay, but I think, Monty, give us one sentence on that one, and then please your message from Borlaug for the future.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm highly honored that you've named me the Norman Borlaug of Africa. Grateful. Actually, Nerica is a rice that we developed. I say we, because I led the process of developing an interspecific hybridization between the African indigenous species and the Asian indigenous species. These are the two cultivated species of rice. And for 50 years, people have been trying to combine the genes of these two types of rice into a single rice variety that would give the high yield potential of the Asian rice and the adaptation of the African rice, which means resistance, tolerance, so the key stresses that we encounter in agricultural systems in Africa. So we came up with the methodology that enabled us to come up with true to type progenies of these two types. And today we have Nerica rice there with higher yield potential, higher level of resistance or tolerance to some of these key stresses, higher protein content, et cetera, et cetera. So that's Nerica rice. But I believe that, I believe in the concept of green, from green to evergreen. And we know that the Green Revolution did not come to Africa. It went to Latin America, to Asia, but not to Africa. And we are still struggling to get the Green Revolution. And I'm sure that if Borlaug were around today, he would have liked to see the Green Revolution get to Africa. And I'm sure wherever he is, he's hoping that this will happen and happen as soon as possible. So I will concentrate on some of the key things that I believe Borlaug would want us in Africa to address to be able to attain the Green Revolution. I will look back to 2009, and we recall the World Bank report, the development report. And that report actually brought a turnaround in the world's thinking of agriculture, agricultural development, and how agricultural development would result eventually to rural development. That same year, we had the G8 L'Aquila meeting, and that meeting endorsed food security, support to food security, even said that they would go down to the farm level. That same year, 2009, the African leaders met, and they had their summit on agriculture for the first time. And that summit decided that they should give support to agriculture, agricultural research, and they called on all African nations to increase production to the level of 6%. And that 6% translates to something like 4.4% total factor productivity. So I think that Africa has been lagging behind in terms of agricultural productivity, lagging behind the rest of the world. So I will think that one of the things that we need to do is to focus on how to increase productivity in the continent so that we cover the gap and catch up with the other regions of the world. And it should be total factor productivity. Because when I looked at the presentations that were made since we got here, people have been talking of land productivity, water productivity, labor productivity. Land productivity, I think we need to look at replenishing our soil. We need to look at using external inputs. But at the same time, I think we need to look at intensification of our system. I think this came up in a discussion yesterday. Intensification of our system, because what we're practicing right now is mostly extensive production system, shifting cultivation, which is resulting to depletion of our soil and at the same time, destruction of the environment. And in terms of irrigation, Africa has plentiful of water. Rainfall in some of the countries, like in my country, Sierra Leone, goes beyond 3,000 millimeters per annum, to up to 4,000 millimeters. And it goes for like 6 months to 8 months. So I don't see why we should not go into aquaculture. I do not see why we should not increase the area under irrigation in the continent. We are lagging behind other regions in these areas. When it comes to the last one, which is labor productivity, we lack the machinery. And here I'm not just talking of combine harvesters or tractors, which I believe most government would like to get for their countries, but even the small machineries for land preparation, for weeding, for threshing. Those are the kind of things that we believe will increase labor productivity. So this is one aspect that I see that we need to address. The other aspect that I believe is very important is competitiveness of agricultural system. Borlaug would like to see that happening in Africa, and I believe that the value of export to some extent measures your competitiveness. And if we look, African competitiveness has been going down, dropping from about 8% in 1970 to something like 2% or just above 2% today. And we're losing quite a lot because if we translate that loss into monetary terms, it spells out to something like 70 to 100 billion US dollars annually. So we need to increase our competitiveness. It means we have to produce quality products, and we have to do everything to produce quality products, and to some extent, we need to add value to our products so that we can sell our product in the international world. Now, these two issues, productivity, increasing competitiveness of our system, could translate to enhancing agribusiness for the continent. How do we handle the products that we get? And if we look again at the agribusiness, at the food sector totally, and look at production, and I believe it was mentioned in the session before this one, that when we talk of production, farming, which has been the emphasis in Africa all these years, we're looking at crops, we're looking at tuber crops, cash crop, staple food crop, tree crops, and now we are saying that we should lay emphasis on livestock and fish as well. These are very important. But we've neglected the other aspect of the value chain, and that is the agribusiness. So much so that today, the agribusiness value added to the value chain is only about 38%, compared to 78% for the rest of the world. This is serious. Ours is skewed towards farming. The rest of the world is skewed towards agro-industry, agribusiness. And I think that this is an area that we need to develop. We need to close that balance. We need to create a balance, and close that gap between these two sectors. And I think that Africa need to stop and think and try to make sure that they concentrate not only on farming, but try to bridge the, what I would say, the focus more on farming and to the expense of agribusiness. And having said that, I will just take 1 more minute. Having said that, I think that the issue of farmers, transform them to business people, the issue of promoting, even at the subsistent level, promoting smallholder commercialization, and the issue of what we all know relating to building building mechanization for use by the people, and also building the infrastructure, whether it's physical infrastructure, road, transport, ICT, that will enable the farmers to get the necessary information. So these are some of the things that I would like to put on the ground. All of these coupled to what the African Union said about achieving our aspiration of ending hunger and promoting food security and eventually sustainable development. Through long-term vision, strategy documents, through political will, through capacity building, all of this, I think. So many things on the list. This is because we're lagging behind.
Thank you. Thank you, Mamti. You heard very different, but also very complementary ways of getting us into a Borlaug 2.0. Green, evergreen revolution, a focus not just on productivity, but also on nutrition. And if I may add, from my perspective, not just nutrition security, but also food safety. Increasingly, safety in the food chain, I think, would also be something that Norm would be thinking about. We heard about the importance of the private sector, the fact that indeed it's not just a matter of producing research results, but that it's a very close connection, which Norm already knew about, linking it into agribusiness, also the entrepreneurship at the farm level. And maybe there's one thing I may add from my perspective and also from my own interactions with Norm, particularly the last years when he was still quite active and I was at the FAO, and that is to restore the trust in science, the public trust that's evidence-based decision-making means that science has a role to play wherever governments make up their minds about agriculture and food. Norm felt very strongly that we should openly debate complicated issues such as genetic modification, such as the use of pesticides or chemicals in general, and that we shouldn't shy away from the difficulties of moving towards a more modernized agriculture, even in countries that were lagging so much behind. And it's this balance, this idea that it is the role of us all to engage in a debate, a dialogue, a conversation with governments about the trust in science. I feel that is also very much part of Borlaug 2.0. And let's not forget that it was Norman's success, not just to work on the technicalities of breeding, but also to convince governments. If he hadn't gone out to India and Pakistan and discussed with those governments that they should take the risk and really work on those new varieties and get them flown in, get the seeds flown in, take the risk, dare to do something new, things would have looked very different in your part of the world. So Norm was also someone who believed that negotiation and governance were part of a green revolution. Now we have a very long list, and I'm asking you all to come up with more Twitter questions and comments on this conversation as we go on. Can we set some priorities, or are we just adding to the problem by making it bigger? Let's assume all of you are sitting on a mountain of money. Say you have $1 million at your disposal. Where are we going to put that $1 million US dollars, or if you want even euros, makes it even better. For the time being, I know the exchange rate is not as good as it used to be. Anyway, so let's assume you had $1 million every year for 5 years. Where would you put it? Where would you put it first? I think we agree all these items are important. Now, question number one. Would you put it on the evergreen revolution, so say the environmental sides, including, for example, adaptation to climate change, making sure we work on fewer pesticides, less impact on the environment, or would you put it on the nutritional side? I know this is an impossible question, but this whole revolution, green revolution or whatever you want to call it, is about impossible things. So I want to have a first vote. Who says the top priority is the evergreen revolution? Put up your green card. Now, I cannot see you guys very much because I have the lights in my eyes. Do I see a majority of green cards? Okay, let me then get the second part of the question. Who feels, get the green ones down, who feels that no, it's not the evergreen revolution, but it's nutrition security that is the top priority? The red ones. So red for nutrition security and green for the evergreen. So we see more red than green. My panel agrees, huh? Okay, so nutrition security, including the items that we've mentioned. I have two colors here. No, we're not doing it in two colors. Right now, we're going to force you a choice, because that's exactly what governments have to do. They only have their millions, and they can spend them only once. And maybe one of the problems today is that we want to spend them in little bits on all kinds of subjects. So for the time, we say food and nutrition security, including safety, is a priority. MS, what would Norm have said? Do you feel food and nutrition security overrides the greener, evergreen, green revolution? Should we first put our money into nutrition? Yes?
Well, this is a very important question. I mentioned earlier that one of the requirements today for sustainable food security, because the UN SDG goals particularly mention sustainable agriculture. The word sustainable has been added before agriculture. This will require a wide range of crops, even if not going back to the Incas' time. Some of the books like The Lost Crops of the Incas, The Lost Crops of Africa by Waitmer, published by the National Academy of Sciences, shows how rich originally the diet was. Gradually it has shrunk. I think it requires both education as well as probably climatic compulsion, if climate change necessitates some changes in the cropping sequences. So I believe 2 years ago the United Nations had International Year of Quinoa, and I find my own country, as a result of the publicity given to quinoa, a lot of people who didn't even know the crop have now started taking the crop. So it requires education, it requires public policy support, and also it requires much more research in the so-called orphan crops.
Ronnie, do you agree? Let's assume you're heading all of the endowments of Cornell for a moment. Are you going to put all your money into food and nutrition security? And if so, would you go for the orphan crops, or would you go for our well-known three: corn, maize, or rice, and wheat?
Well, that's a hard question for an old wheat breeder, rice breeder.
I know.
But I have to say that I really admire what Jan Lowe, a Cornell graduate, by the way, and others are doing with these crops. I think this is a way to, really deliver to the people who need it in Africa. The big grain crops are not necessarily the right medium for addressing the nutritional needs. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I just want to mention one other thing that you alluded to. I don't know if did you all see your pin, and did you pull out the banner? Whoa, yeah, you got to discover that. So, a transcending issue is restoring the faith in science. I mean, science is really challenged these days, and we have something called the Alliance for Science. That's what this banner says. You can go to our website, you can join it, you can be active in it, and we're making. So I think a big issue that Norm would agree with is the need to communicate more effectively. All of us as scientists, we have to get better at it, and we have to restore faith in science, because if we lose that, that transcends all these issues.
I couldn't agree more. Faith in science. But if we have an interesting issue here that I want you to sort of carry forward in your mind. The Green Revolution in its classical form was focused mainly on the major cereals. We always had a problem, for example, extending it to the root and tuber crops. It only came later. And today, of course, our debate is also about diversity. We heard that very, very eloquently this morning from Mahmoud Khan. It's about diversity of ideas, but it's also diversity of crops. And I think when we say food and nutrition security, we acknowledge implicitly that this is about the diversity of diets. You do not get healthy by eating one thing. You get healthy because of a whole pattern. And that pattern should include more than just the classical carbohydrate crops that we know that we've been working on. I think Norm would have approved also very much in a Borlaug 2.0 of extending our work not only to orphan crops, but also very much to horticultural crops. The future in terms of vitamins and minerals is very much also into horticulture. And beyond that, and here comes your second vote, we haven't talked very much about other things but crops. Don't you think Norm Borlaug would have approved of putting a major effort, for example, into fish production or other sources of protein as part of that diet diversification? Or do you feel we should continue, first of all, with carbohydrates as the mainstay of diets? So I want to vote. Who thinks a green, evergreen food and nutrition kind of revolution should also include fish? A red one for fish. Are you in favor of spending some of your billions or millions of dollars onto fish? Is anybody not in favor of fish? Okay. Now, there are a couple of fish centers that have their work spent out. But the question here, of course, the interesting question is, as we move to aquaculture, is the combination, of course, of vegetables and fish ponds together and making it into an integrated ecosystem. And I think that is going to be another message, that the whole back row, when you start your research, those are the kinds of subjects. Now, let's move on a little bit. We've had the evergreen, but we haven't really talked enough about that. What do we do with climate change? Monty, I'm looking at you in Africa, where possibly some of the greatest effects of climate change will happen. Now, from a Borlaug 2.0 perspective, where would you put your money in terms of mitigating, adapting to climate change?
Well, I will, well, looking at the projection that is made that climate change is going to have severe effects, you know, in Africa compared to other regions of the world, I would think that we should adapt the two strategy for Africa, and which means try to strike a balance, because adaptation will come for us to get necessary varieties that will be able to get to maturity before we are hard hit with problems like drought, etc. You know, it calls for us to make sure that we look at that duration of such materials and we look at the yield potential of such materials. And mitigation is also a very important aspect that I think we should look at as well. So the two should go together. I know that in most cases, the developing world is talking more of mitigation. Africa is talking more of adaptation. So I would throw my lot to adaptation.
Okay, here's a question for the, sorry, Ronnie, do you want to add something?
I just want to say that, you know, we should recognize that the big crops are imperiled by climate change. Wheat yield goes down a ton for every degree the average temperature goes up. So we're looking at big problems in wheat unless we have strong ongoing breeding programs to adapt the crop to what's going to happen. Rice, sea level is coming up 2 centimeters a year. Brackish water is coming up the big river deltas where most of the world's rice is grown. It's unless we increase the salinity tolerance and mitigate that somehow, there's huge challenges. So that's something I think it's really important to recognize.
Absolutely, yeah.
Important point which Ron has made. You know, I think there are so many changes which are taking place today. For example, in India, BT cotton was very successful, but today a white fly has come which is devastating the crop, because that was for the bollworms. So when the temperature changes, mean temperature changes, the whole spectrum of the diseases also change. I have seen in the past when wheat rust for control, loose mud became very important. So the alternative which is taking place, which also, so that's where eternal vigilance is the price of good agriculture. I think very important to strengthen our monitoring systems. What happens when a new technology comes? Even during the Green Revolution days, if there had been a little more attention to what is going to happen to the groundwater or to the excessive use of fertilizers, until Rachel Carson pointed out in her Silent Spring, people didn't take note of the problems arising from wrong use of pesticide. So I believe that all kinds of research, both applied as well as anticipatory research and participatory research with local families, have become very important.
Thank you. So we agree that probably the problem that Norm couldn't see in the way we can see it today, the most important problem is the problem of climate change. And climate change, of course, means in the reality of a farmer, changes in weather patterns, but also changes in pest and disease pressure, and changes in the soil, changes in salinity, and so on. So I want to know if you're still sitting on your $1 million a year, I hope. You haven't spent them on. Actually, I should have given you sort of little bits and pieces, and you could have spent all your money on one subject, and you wouldn't be allowed to vote on other subjects. So this whole audience participation is not totally objective. But let me know, who feels that the issues relating to adapting crops to climate change are really foremost or should be foremost on the agenda? Salinity, drought, high night temperatures, new pest and disease pressures. Who feels that's a big issue? Green for climate change. Anybody who feels that we shouldn't do something about this? Can I have a red one up? Okay, you're rapidly spending your money here. Huh? We won't have a lot of money left. Clearly, we have to ask those governments for more money.
I like this funding mechanism. This keeps coming.
This is a sort of ultimate funding idea. The more, the better. You only have 2 bits of paper. You don't have them even, Ronnie. But climate change is not just about adaptation to stress. It's also about mitigation. Or to put it differently, climate change is also saying, and it's important that we say it today, 1.5 months from the great climate meeting that we will have in Paris, the COP21, climate change also means that we say that agriculture is part of the solution and not just part of the problem. Why is agriculture part of the solution? Because there are many ways in which agriculture can help to mitigate climate problems. By storing carbon in the soil, for example, by even taking out, perhaps more actively, carbon from the air than it did before, by replacing fossil fuels with bio-based materials, by decreasing, for example, methane emissions from rice fields, by decreasing emissions from animals' guts, and so on and so forth. So what should we do in that area? And I'd like to ask my panel, although you are primarily crops people, what, Ronnie, should be the real challenges for mitigation?
For mitigation?
So agriculture contributing to solving the climate problem, not the adaptation side.
Well, you know, as a plant breeder, it doesn't take me long to get to the solution. I mean, I think more investment in plant breeding is a real key. But of course, you can't look to the past necessarily for the solutions to the future. At the same time, as Howard Buffett said this morning, the present situation is just not acceptable. So I think. You know, a realization that we have to sustain the public investments in such important part of science as plant breeding. I mean, this is a real crisis that we're facing. We've got climate change coming at us in a big way, and the funding for these major plant breeding programs in both the major and minor crops is not there in a sustainable way. And
Monty, we know about the Maputo agreements, the commitments a long time ago that African government made to spend money on agriculture. how do you feel today about the African government's commitment to keeping up the investments in agriculture and agricultural science in particular? Are they enough? Can we do anything there?
Well, actually, I believe all countries in Africa have increased their investment in agriculture and agricultural research in the last decades or so. And I think that it's because of that declaration. Some countries have done better than others, and I think that those countries that have done well in terms of getting to the 10% commitment of their national budget to agriculture and agricultural research are reaping the benefit today. So I think that was a good thing that our leaders had to take that decision. And I believe that all countries, including my own country, we're looking at getting to that level of 10%. We're not there yet. And I believe this is the trend, in all African countries. So yes, it's beginning to pay, but the international community can do well to meet with our leaders whenever, or at least bring up this subject whenever they meet with them. That was what Norman did when he went to India. He went direct to the president and to the prime minister of India, Bangladesh, and tell them that rice seed must go with other inputs. So whenever you, the big people from outside, meet with our presidents or our leaders, you should hammer this point to them, that we have to get to the 10% level or even beyond that 10% level. And that way we would see more work being done in the agricultural sector and agricultural research sector.
Thank you. MS, is the Indian government doing enough to invest in agricultural development and nutrition?
Well, the present government of India is now going to be nearly 2 years old. They have announced that they will have a pro-farmer policy because, India, unfortunately, I mentioned about the Food Security Act, how we came out from Bengal famine to right to food with homegrown food. On the other hand, there are a large number of farmer suicides. There are problems which are related to the economics of farming, many of that has become a great disincentive for the younger generation when they see the older people were not. So the government is taking some action, but in my own personal view, much more seriousness. There is a little bit of complacency because there's a grain stock of 50 million tons. Usually, grain mountains and hungry millions coexist, but you have to look at the hungry millions rather than the grain mountains. The government, the Prime Minister has announced that high priority this year is the International Year of the Soil. So very high priority will be given to providing to every farmer a soil health card, an understanding of soil health in its totality, the physics, chemistry, and microbiology of the soil. Government has also announced a major investment in irrigation. But there are problems in irrigation in India because many of them are we are a federal country, interprovincial rivers. Sharing of those waters becomes a problem. So I think the government is pro-farmer. I happen to chair a National Commission on Farmers. For the first time, either in colonial India or in independent India, there was a commission on farmers. There was a lot of commission on agriculture, but not on farmers. And we recommended a policy for pricing, ensuring markets and pricing and so on. Some of them, no action has not been taken, but I hope they will be taken. But pronouncements are encouraging, I would call it. But pronouncements are to become action plan.
Exactly. Between words and deeds, there are many, many gaps and problems. I now want to hear from some of the people in the room, and especially all those under 30. The over 30s get their chance later, have already had a chance in life. If you were to advise, it takes a while to sink in these kinds of things. Okay, the over 30s, you may laugh, but you're not allowed to speak right now. The under 30s in this room, you're still sitting on your 1 million, let's assume that. What are you going to do? What would you do tomorrow? Or perhaps putting it less in a provocative way, what is going to be your priority project to work on in the spirit of Borlaug 2.0 evergreen revolution, nutrition security, more trust, more private sector, governance involved, all that together. What is going to be your priority? Who can I give the floor in the back of the room? Are you under 30?
Under 30?
Yeah?
No.
No. Okay. I'm going to ask the under 30s first. I can't see a thing because of the lights, so you have to stand up and wave at me. Any under 30s who have bright ideas of what they want to do? Yes, go ahead. Speak up. Give us your name and where you're from.
My name is Emma Flemig. I'm from Iowa, but I'm at Virginia Tech now. I think that we need to focus on storage and processing, that part of conservation is saving what we already produce instead of simply trying to produce more. So low-cost storage solutions is one thing I would focus on.
So you're going to work on storage tomorrow? Yes? Okay, very good. Very good point. Anybody else under 30, or let me just sort of make it up a little bit, under 35 perhaps. Okay, good. Go, walk up to the mic. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Ashley Sakira. I'm from CNFA in Washington, D.C. I would say we should work on improving the profitability of farming so that youth stay engaged in agriculture.
Say that again.
Improve the profitability of farming so
Profitability.
that youth stay engaged in agriculture.
Okay, what are you going to do tomorrow? Yes, you?
What? Sorry, what did you say?
Are you going to do something specific tomorrow to take this forward?
I would say engaging the private sector and encouraging youth to stay in agriculture.
Good, good. Okay, under 30 or under 35? I won't guess.
I'm definitely under 30. I just got my ID. Just got my license. So my name is Matt. I'm from Penn State, and if I still had $1 million, I'd probably want to improve access from farms to market through roads. So I'd probably have government investment, if that's a possibility, or private investment, especially from Coca-Cola or Pepsi. So.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Francis from Cameroon. I think if I have to invest my money in agriculture, I should invest in post-harvest management. I think it's one of the big problems that we are facing in Cameroon, for example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me give one quick chance for the over 35s. Anybody who has a bright idea, don't get up all at once. What are we going to do tomorrow? Borlaug 2.0.
I'm not 35 at all.
Sorry.
If I had $1 million to invest into something, I would want to do something to do a lot of more development and research to help agriculture in a way that helps the environment and climate change, and make sure that we just keep it sustainable.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
At some point, we'll have to minimize soil loss, and I was wondering what the thoughts are on alternative land management, such as switching to more human food production instead of commodities, and then resting, since it doesn't require that much land, resting some of the land so that the soil degradation doesn't continue. So.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm over 35, 44. I'm Eric Engstrom. I'm a professor at Monmouth College, and if I had that $1 million, I would take it and try and encourage more of those under 30s who are interested in agriculture to think not just about going into agricultural economics, the students I teach, for instance, or agricultural research, but to become farmers, to get their hands in the dirt, to realize that this is something that you can do with all your education and all your smarts, and because that's really where the rubber meets the road, is with those farmers.
Great,
so,
thank you. Yes, you're the last one, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I'm over 35. My name is Jody Reisner, and what I would do is I would try to gather people across disciplines, because I don't think we do that as well in agriculture. So getting people across disciplines and across sciences And my specific thing would be gather those people together and work on looking at the soil resource and protecting it, because the soil resource will also help many other ecosystem services connected to agriculture, whether it be water quality or climate mitigation, so all of those factors.
Okay, thank you. I have room for one last question of an over 55.
I
You're
am
over
way not over
55?
55. Can I
Okay,
make my
well.
comment, or do you want over 55? I'm Abby Bymaster. I'm from Lafayette, Indiana, and I teach nothing related to agriculture. I teach biomedical sciences, and so if I had $1 million, I would probably invest that in teaching the students who know nothing about agriculture, who have zero agricultural background. I would teach them about the importance of where their food comes from and why it's important that we have things like the World Food Prize, because the majority of us are in agreement with what's being talked about here, but there's a very large majority of people who don't know and who don't understand, and they need to know.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you. Back to my panel. One last sentence, and no more than one sentence. What is the advice you would give to all those here to start tomorrow in the light of a new green revolution, a new Borlaug 2.0? What is your most important recommendation? MS.
I couldn't quite catch. What did you see?
Your most important recommendation for the new generations.
The most important question for the new generation is to retain interest in agriculture and not desert this profession, and that's what I would say. And also look at the problems in that totality system problem. Yesterday, Dr. Perpinstrup Anderson mentioned, and his team mentioned about aquaculture, fish culture. 97% of the world's water is seawater. What are we doing with it? There's a great opportunity here for biosaline farming and so on. So for the new generation, one, please see what I said earlier, the future belongs to nations with grains and not guns. Secondly, take interest in kind of research which has been neglected, but which could open up enormous opportunities for us, both not only livelihood, but also for sustainable food security.
Thank you. Ronnie.
I think if Dr. Borlaug were here, he would say to you, you're all important. Work together. A great admonishment he had for me and others was, he used to say, keep the herd together. You know, it's really important to be complementary in your work and work with each other, industry and academia, one discipline versus another. That's a big message I think he would send us.
Thank you, Ronnie. That's a beautiful message. Monty.
I would say increased investment in agriculture and agricultural research, and to promote the innovation approach to technology generation, dissemination, and adoption, because for Africa we have this range of crops, livestock, fish, and all these entities need to come together to address those issues to increase, of course, food security for the country, for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Well, if I may add the last few sentences based on what I think Norm would have felt, I think he would have been incredibly proud. Proud that so many people still think in terms of his legacy and not only look towards the past, but take his legacy as an inspiration for the future. Isn't it beautiful that we sit here and talk about Borlaug 2.0 and really seriously ask ourselves where the priorities are? And I'd like to echo what he said. There's no time to relax. We are in a hurry. We have no time to lose. Too many words are in fact a luxury we cannot afford. We must act, and we must make sure that all those who act indeed together. Governments, science, farmers, retail, private sector, consumers, you have it. This is a collective effort, but we can do it. And I'm very grateful that MS put so clearly to us, this is the zero hunger generation. The future can be without hunger. Yes, there are many, many places where this is not the case, but it's a matter of peace very often and not so much a matter of technology. We have no time to lose. We cannot afford to relax. But what we must do is make the right choices. And I've said yesterday when I spoke to the high school students, don't fret too much about the subject matter. Don't worry too much as to whether you want to be a breeder, be a second Ronnie Kaufman or a second Monty Jones, or whether you want to be a soil scientist or an agronomist or a nutritionist. Don't worry too much about that. But go about it with passion and compassion and try to become a little Norm Borlaug in everything you do. Thank you very much.